And this may be the waterfall even for Indian SaaS, for example, where so many people who are so familiar, deeply, related to a market where so many companies are trying to find solutions for. So I think both as business people who can explain and structure the problem solutions better, and then to as engineering folks who can build around that. I think India can benefit a lot. The startup ecosystem can benefit a lot from these folks who are coming back if they have to come back.
Today we had Rahul Chandra on the 1947 Rise podcast. Rahul is managing director at Arkam Ventures, an early stage tech VC fund. Arkam's portfolio includes incredible companies like SmallCase, Jaikisan, Jar, KrazyBee, to name a few. In this episode, we covered Rahul's journey from growing up in India to moving to the US and then moving back to India, his work at Helion Ventures, which he helped co-found, and how did Arkam Ventures come about, the founding story of Arkam, the investment thesis that Arkam has, and we also got to know him outside of work. I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot from this conversation. I'm hoping that this conversation would be useful to you as well. I am excited to have Rahul Chandra of Arkam Ventures on 1947 Rise podcast. Rahul, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be on the show, Shiva. Finally, after many false starts, good to be on.
Yeah, and last night your flight got delayed for 4 hours from you were flying back to Bangalore from Bombay. You just had 4.5 hours sleep, and you're still doing this. So I really, really appreciate it, Rahul. Thanks a lot. We'll get going. Rahul, typically we are really a product of our early experiences in life. Maybe you can talk about your early life in India, and then what made you move to the US, and then your move back to India.
Sure, Shiva. Yeah. So I'll start with where I grew up, which actually has a lot to do with where I went and what I did. So I grew up in a Dehradun, which was very different from what it is today. Dehradun was this uh, an island of very cosmopolitan population because it's always had a lot of research institutes like Forest Research or Geological Institute, ONGC. So people from all over India were always coming to work there. And as a result, it also became a center for high quality education. So I went to a very large public school run by the Jesuit organization, St. Joseph's. And again, large classes, 50 plus people in each class, but extremely disciplined, as well as a place where you could pretty much be and do what you felt like doing. And again, very close, comforting. It was like less than a kilometer from my place. I would walk there even as a very young kid. So a lot of freedom to kind of just wander through what at that time was a very green Dehradun. Take shortcuts through through the middle of some green patch and jump over a stream, and exactly like that. So very,
Mhm.
very nice, close to nature childhood. And from there, I was part of a class which actually was pretty motivated, at like uh, a lot of people from smaller places to get somewhere, write exams, and study actually for the most part of it. So we did that, and we were one of the largest batches to go into BITS Pilani. So I found myself in the middle of the desert. And again, BITS was different at that time, not as close to the startup environment that it has right now, but still, it gave you extremely high degrees of freedom as a 20 year old, or at that time when I went, I was about 18. So for an 18-year-old, it was just the world opening up. By the time I finished from BITS, I kind of had developed an interest in finance, which was new in India, had opened up a lot of things. We had professors coming in from who were BITSians, from Rochester Institute or from places in the US like NYSE to come and speak to us. And it really opened the world of, how the financial system works. So I found myself again from BITS to SEBI in Mumbai, which had just opened. It became the primary regulator of the financial system in India, capital markets. And so I was in Mumbai a 21-year-old walking the corridors where, stalwarts like G.V. Ramakrishna, who was the early chairman of SEBI, he used to smoke a cigar and walk down the corridors. And it was, again, a very small place. I think that time maybe less than 100 people in all of SEBI. And we were very close to the powers that be, writing the regulations that made the financial system what it is today. So some of the early regulations came into place, and again, it was an extremely astounding experience. Finance minister would come by, there would be finance secretaries who would have meetings there, and we would be again, in the shadows, but just the experience of looking at where things get decided. That gave me a sense of what is centricity of financial system. Again, people that we've only seen in magazines would be there every other day waiting in the reception. Early days for a lot of large corporations that you see now, Kotak, DSP, JP Morgan, or what it was at that point. So very early days of a lot of people that went on to create very large organizations. My own
Yeah.
journey, kind of in terms of choosing where I went from there, was to go and work in an investment bank. So I went to Lazard, where again, learning the early part of my career was more about. Well, one more thing about SEBI was that I worked for a gentleman who had extremely high order work ethic in terms of work first before everything else. So in my case, that was a big learning at SEBI of just the definition of what it takes
Mhm.
to do your job, and the extremely high degree of honesty that's needed. As they say, tan man dhan, everything was actually part of delivering on that, and that I saw from a mentor I found at SEBI, and that was extremely valuable for the rest of my life. SEBI, I moved to Lazard, but found my calling finally at a place which was advising investors on public markets. So that was a company called Quantum, and they were advising a US VC fund called Walden. So I went, joined Quantum, and found myself working on what at that time was the very early uh, shape of venture capital in India. So for the first time, there was a checkbook which was uncommitted, and you had to find an opportunity that money could go into. So, part of some early investments that were made there, three of those became extremely large, $500 million to $1 billion companies. One of them was Mindtree. Moved with Walden to the US.
Mhm.
So I was then in Palo Alto. And this came again from a desire, and I expressed that desire that India will take forever to start looking like or being an ecosystem to which I had committed that at that point. If I was going to do VC, then India at that time was very, very early. So I expressed a desire to actually be in the heart of Silicon Valley, and Walden had this again a global international feel, a lot of people from all over the world and different countries. So it was not an unusual thing to have people come from a Hong Kong to the US, and I was again the first one from India to just land up there and work in this VC organization. So that kind of then led me down the VC path, and then operating in the valley was something else. Went to business school there at Haas, which is Berkeley's business school, and then 2006 I came back as a co-founder of Helion, which was the
Mhm.
earliest Indian domestic VC firm. But what was different is that there were a lot of very traditional US LPs that had backed Helion. So then I was back, and I've been back ever since. But the background then goes to seeing VC uh, in very early days before it exploded on the scene. Most cases, I had to
Mhm.
explain in detail what VC was, and now obviously, it's there's
Yeah.
Shark Tank in India, so you don't have to explain what it means to carry a checkbook and find an opportunity. And then from
Mhm.
Helion onwards, of course, it was working on three funds deploying about $100 million, and then right now I'm working on a new fund which is called Arkam. Wrote a book in the middle about that journey, and yeah, I think also um, kind of enjoying this journey through a lot of changes, obviously, from that time when, not much was happening in India now to where everything is happening in India.
Mhm. Absolutely, Rahul. I think you had a very interesting, journey professionally so far. With working with regulators, then banking, then being probably, if not the first one, but one of the very early ones, where you've been helping global funds deploy capital into India, and then you launched Helion, and now you're doing a fund which is Arkam Ventures. Rahul, would love for you to talk about the founding story of Arkham, and also I think you are very thematic and sector focused, which is you're focused on the middle India, or 500 450 million Indians, we can call them, and you're from pre-series A to series B. Would love for you to dig deeper into it.
Sure, Shiva. So, what was happening at Helion for me personally is I was spending more and more time on the financial services bucket, and that was
Mhm.
where I was deploying. In the process of that, I came across again the different, and the reason why I did that was because of the background you mentioned. I was at a regulator which was regulating financial services, so I had probably the again, um, as compared to other folks who are in the partnership, I had the longer experience with financial services in India, so I chose to then spend more time on it. So I looked at the entire ecosystem. There were again manufacturing companies, distribution companies, and then there were customers who were served, and there were customers who were not served. There were products which were underpenetrated and products which were overpenetrated. And obviously, nothing was overpenetrated, but generally, for that TG, it was overpenetrated. For another TG, it was completely underpenetrated. So the it was a very exciting ecosystem. Um, the company set of companies that actually took me down to what the thesis at Arkham then became were mostly about um, getting products to people who had just or not even started their journey down the adoption of financial products. So if you look at the
Mhm.
long arc in India, there were people in the 2010 timeframe who had not even had a bank account ever. And so the emphasis was on how to formalize, how to formalize credit to begin with, and get their first access to credit, take them away from informal credit to formal credit. And in the background, there was a lot of new bank accounts getting opened to enable that process. Microfinance was cutting through all this, and they had a lot of support from the government and the regulator in making sure that some kind of formalized credit was made available to people who had never had access to that in places obviously which are very remote. There was no technology. People had to carry cash in bikes, drive around a village, have people collect in certain locations. Extremely, I would say, manual, laborious, but that's what made it very attractive because it was so hard to do. And so microfinance companies that could crack markets, build a culture of credit in people who had not
Mhm.
ever understood or not known credit. I think that was the beauty of what microfinance was doing. And when I saw that
Yeah.
up close, it was more an understanding of the customer who needed that small amount of formal credit. And then I was also blown away by the respect that a customer who didn't have the means, what respect they had for the fact that they were chosen to receive that formal credit, and very diligent about repaying. So the root of credit culture, which is
Mhm.
which was planted with microfinance and other um, personal loan companies, was extremely important to then use as what are people using that money for, where are they repaying from, and what else
Mhm.
are they missing in that whole financial stability journey. So again, this is a big chunk of a nation which is growing. GDP development is happening at a rapid pace. Engine for this kind of growth is access to financial products. It's not just the financial well-being is a journey, and then we were in very early days of that. But
Mhm.
also unique to this customer was that in general, everything essential was not available easily. And the essential
Yeah.
was the non-discretionary bucket of spend, in which four, five things made up about 90% of that bucket. And so access to quality healthcare, obviously, access to quality education, um, the cost and pricing of food, pretty much of what came from the farm, what was grown there, and how it landed up at a grocery store, and of course financial services. These are things which were built as an industry to serve a very small base of customers, because these are pre any tech stack industry formats. People would walk in, or people, by the time it gets, the vegetables are half spoiled, or when you get to a local hospital, half the services are not, and then you have to go, half a day or one day to a bigger city hospital. So there was this common thing of this customer not being able to access the best quality because of the scale the customer was part of. So there is a middle class India and above, which would
Hmm.
have two things. One was locational advantage, and second was ability to pay. Both then being able to cut that access to being able to pay for, and being able to be close to where the services were being delivered. Um, and there is this other 400 million of middle India, which is either not living close to the service, or they can't afford to pay the way
Yeah.
a fully, I would say, somebody who's been in the formal financial system for a long time can afford to pay. That was very meaningful, because the nature of this customer was still the older world. Think of this as a household expense. So food, transportation, health is considered to be part of a bigger household, which is living together longer, even if they're working members, because their incomes are not large enough to support themselves individually, but in a group, they can access more. So
Yeah.
households became the buying unit, typically for this TG. And they have um, they don't have a affordability problem. They have more of a how to pay for, or the timing of the payment problem. So that was another common thing. So their consumption was again uh, very unique, because they would like to pay for exactly what they were consuming. They would not buy things in bulk upfront. And this is not just grocery, but for anything. Um, so a lot of common threads on this TG definition, behavior definition, became the
Hmm.
underlying factor for then saying, okay, if um, something is changing and access to this user group is becoming easier and more tech enabled, then there will be a lot of
Hmm.
innovation opportunities that would happen, because somebody's going to make these high quality services available and accessible to this very large user class. So Arkham's
Hmm.
thesis is really built on the fact that now technology is creating this access. Technology is creating this, either locational advantage or payment advantage, and
Hmm.
uh, the public stack is really what's helping us take these services to this user group through the companies that are building
Hmm.
on top of the public rails. And that has been
Yeah.
phenomenal in terms of two things happening in Arkham. So Arkham's thesis again is um, companies that innovate on building tech stacks to deliver high quality, non-discretionary services to this 400 million user group. And then many of them are building it on public
Hmm.
rails, which gives very, simple things like eKYC has changed the nature of how this customer is able to access services. So, we are
Yeah.
finding extremely innovative companies that are then able to build products that can access this very large user base.
Got it. And Rahul, maybe you can talk about a few of the companies that you have invested in and how did they come about?
Sure, Shiva. So, across our companies, there'll be two categories. One is companies who are actually going after a completely new market, and they're building the tech stack to then create this new digital market. And typically, the nature of that market would be a very complex um, service in the back, which was
Mm-hmm.
again not accessible for several reasons. But companies that would simplify this complex backend for very high volume consumption by customers in the middle India segment. So what they do is hide
Mm-hmm.
the complexity, create a extremely usable product on the front end, lower the cognitive load, and then have millions and millions of users use that product and adopt something new for the first time, and then bring them onto this formalized
Mm-hmm.
system through this extremely usable product. So if you
Yeah.
one example is SmallCase, for example, which is one of the best products in India that is allowing for what earlier without SmallCase was just not accessible by this middle India. So mutual funds have limitations of what can you do with them, how they can be distributed digitally, what they will cost to distribute them to hundreds of millions of users. So there's three major issues with mutual funds. While it is a intentionally it is a great product because it's a diversified basket, right? So there's not there is extremely um, logical sense of putting savings or doing investments in mutual funds. But then the way the industry is structured, which is incentivizing physical distribution or the existing distribution network, that um, that incentivizes active management versus passive managed funds, which are doing to some extent the same job of giving you diversification and access to certain themes, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
easily distributed digitally. So small case is actually filling this 50% of AUM gap that is there in India compared to any other country of passive investing. Right? So it's just take the entire investment industry in India and imagine that 50% should be passive, and right now it is in the 3-4% range. And if you create a digitally distributable product which is giving the same value as a mutual fund at lower ticket price, lower ticket sizes, then you can fill that gap that is structurally not possible in the current format. The small case is then structurally changing it by building all the pipes and rails to take a diversified basket to a new individual retail investor. Extremely
Mm-hmm.
like product, explains the thematic in the small case very clearly, gives data very easily, and it can be distributed digitally. So that's one example of an Arkam portfolio company. Second is a
Mm-hmm.
company called Jar, which is actually solving something that um, that nobody has attempted so far, which is how do you create a habit of saving for saving's sake? Right? You can come about this in many ways, but saving is an essential factor for financial well-being. So people, when they don't have a saving habit, they are more likely to go through financial extremities and suffer more pain than if they were to have a nest egg. And this is a chicken and egg problem because most people will not ever get into a saving habit and creating the nest egg because they will always feel there is too much overhead in putting some money away. And the millennial population has very high degree of comfort for digital products, but walking into a bank or logging in and putting some money away, the habit formation is not built into those products. So we're looking at a problem which is important to solve, but there is no digital product that helps you do that. So Jar marries the centuries old benefits of gold as a safety asset class, uh, and which can
Mm-hmm.
withstand a lot of inflationary pressures, as well as um, is very efficient again um, to hold value in, marries that with this saving for saving's sake. and that is being done around again a very well thought through product, which is low on cognitive load, easy to understand, and then easy to execute on the back end. So there is again complexity in the back end, but as far as the user is concerned, they're just seeing I have now an ability to save as little as I can afford at that point, but I can still do it, and I can still see my gold balance increasing, which I don't want to let go of because it gives me a lot of comfort. So this virtuous loop actually is then now nicely, neatly built into the product. And Jar's grown to 10 million customers in in a time frame which is one of the shortest in India, in
Yeah.
Indian history.
Yeah. No,
So
absolutely. In fact,
these
like
are
both the
thanks, Shiva. Yeah, and we see this because one, it solves for what is a very essential problem for a very large number of people, and technology is and product especially is what what makes it very usable and highly adoptable. So in both cases,
Mhm.
we've seen user numbers grow very quickly, and of course there is a lot of user love.
Mhm.
So these are two good examples of companies that are creating markets, and then we have a group of companies that are enabling certain markets. So they're traditional markets. Banks are servicing um, or they want to service newer segments. So really small businesses in India, they would have low KYC indexes, which means it takes 3 weeks to bring them on board. And you need new
Yeah.
tools and new services too. So Signzy, for example, takes that 3 weeks to 3 days, in which for a bank it's financially viable now to onboard a very small business customer because
Mhm.
the time to onboard has been reduced significantly. So this company Signzy has kind of made a difference for so many financial institutions in India where they can now access this newer market of Middle India. So these would fall in the enabler bucket category, and so right now we have about 15 companies. They fall in these two buckets, and
Mhm.
we are seeing this post-COVID or during COVID adoption and has only become stronger. So the digitization need or the comfort with shifting to digital products for Middle India has
Mhm.
been phenomenal during the last 2 3 years. So we've seen a combination of products that are built for this market on the public rails and massive amount of pull that's
Mhm.
happening due thanks to the lack of access during COVID from Middle India. So
Mhm.
it's a good time to be in the category we are in, and we are just continuing to
Yeah.
double down on the same thesis.
Got it. And yeah, it's founders who are building digital products for Middle India and really democratizing them by making it as simple as possible for them to use the digital products that they're building. And again, uh, Jar and and SmallCase are great examples there. And Rahul, we were talking about this earlier, where there's about 200,000 employees that recently got laid off in the US, and about 50,000 of them are from India. And I think you've been in a similar situation, which is, you are. Are supposed to find a job within 60 days. If not, then you would have to move back to your country. So a couple of things here. One, I was talking to Anand Chandra Shekhar, and in fact, I had him on the podcast, and he said, typically Shiva, one ecosystem's loss is other ecosystems gain. In India, we are in a cycle where there's about, let's say, 107 unicorns. Bunch of them are scaling. It's an interesting cycle that we are in. If people who are thinking about moving back to India, Rahul, how should you think, maybe a framework you may have for them that they should have in mind when they're making the move back to India?
Yeah, so I also made the move as you said, and the mindset that again I had a great employer in the US, very flexible, um, but my friends who were on H1s always had this overhang that we don't know what life is going to be after 3 years. So you anyways are living with that, window to window, and you don't know. You're hoping you are in a foreign country at the end of the day, and but what you're doing is working on cutting edge problems that is teaching you a lot about what's really uh, top of mind for some of these large tech or enterprises in the US. So these are very high value problems you're working on. And if you're, fortunate enough to understand the business side of that problem, then to use that knowledge, bring that knowledge to India, where the knowledge of the US market uh, is removed by either the, people who are, living in these geographies. Uh, but if you were to come back, think of this as a bridge to the capability that is there in India to the high value problem that exists in the US. And so, in some sense, you are that bridge which can deepen the understanding of the problem and monetize the solution. So, I think it's a very attractive alternate opportunity for people who are no longer able to work in the US employer setup to then come back and just take that value. And this may be the waterfall even for Indian SaaS, for example, where so many people who are so familiar, deeply related to a market where so many companies are trying to find solutions for. So I think both as business people who can explain and structure the problem solutions better, and then to as engineering folks who can build around that. I think India can benefit a lot. The startup ecosystem can benefit a lot from these folks who are coming back if they have to come back. And this may be the waterfall even for Indian SaaS, for example, where so many people who are so familiar, deeply related to a market where so many companies are trying to find solutions for. So I think both as business people who can explain and structure the problem solutions better, and then to as engineering folks who can build around that. I think India can benefit a lot. The startup ecosystem can benefit a lot from these folks who are coming back if they have to come back. And he just seems to be enjoying that. But I think um, to just pick from you know uh, uh, what animals tend to do better, which is to be in the moment, and that using that feeling to kind of look at life as as a much deeper engagement in what you're doing. I personally had this moments where um, when somebody asked me, "Oh, how's your last month been?" and things that were done only 30 days back seem like I did them a year back. This it seems like so packed, and there is the lifespan is determined by the number of things you end up doing, almost to the point of blurring what has. And on the flip side, when you're in the moment, you feel like you have so much time, and life itself seems much longer. Right? Otherwise, they're just going in a blur. Most people in their 40s and 30s also, it seems like a blur, right? When you ask what has happened, I think the meaningfulness of life, I think, is really a good pursuit to do beyond these two, and that would really be by being in the moment and getting to do things which um, even though you may not be the best at it, or you may not ever become an expert in it, but I think it's good to start working on things you've always wanted to do. um, and I think the um, repetition of some activities that the brain ends up doing, which can be taken over by as I think you were referring to, by a machine, frees up the mind, and that can also be very scary in the beginning, as the mind is is a machine also which tends to over focus on certain repetitive activities, and when you stop that, then it doesn't know what to do with itself. So I think there's a need to ease and just be kind in that moment where you don't have the constant chattering in your head, and you're actually then a bit perturbed because your brain has so much time. There's so much attention that the brain can then focus on other things. So I think there is a moment which is very scary when suddenly everything shuts down and there's less to frequently the news because I'm right, they possibly in a very short time we have no need to occupy it with so many people, but they're occupying it all the time. So I think there'll be a moment, but I think we should all be
Hmm.
prepared for easing into that and not getting worried that hey, suddenly we have more thoughts and room to think than we've ever had, and those thoughts shouldn't be scaring us. I think we should kind of ease that into that this is a transition point to do more meaningful things.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Take a deep breath. Slow down your mind, calm your mind. But mind is a monkey mind. It just never stops. But seems like Rahul, you've been is so. You told me you've been doing yoga. Is that one of the things that helps you in staying present?
Yeah, it certainly does. I'm not as regular as I would like to. I've taken breaks, but I've been doing it for the last 15 years, on and off, Zoom or physical. And this,
Hmm.
I think making the Zoom yoga as effective as the physical yoga was tough, but it gets you halfway there, and it's better than nothing. Um, I think that, and um, over the years, I think I've tried to shift more analytical, occupying the brain with more analytical thoughts to more, um, I would, if for lack of a better word, more empathetic thoughts. And that has been an interesting transition also, to just feel differently about situations. So I think the point where my personal goal to reach is, that nothing is as bad as it seems, and nothing is as good as it looks. So that really is the journey. And on the
Hmm.
on the other side, um, we are again very fortunate to be born in India. I think there is a certain, um, I think, karmic reward that we are all reaping at this point, being born in a country which has always identified ways in which the um, obsession with the self has been identified, and there have been so many ways and schools of thoughts which help you separate um, the real self and who you think you are. And I think this, you just have to kind of breathe the air, look around, and there are countless ways and schools of thoughts that you can use to always remind you that the importance that one likes to give to oneself is overblown. And once you start working on that, it's again like most good things in life, these thoughts compound over the years as you think more about it. you know 2 years of thinking this and 20 years of
Hmm.
thinking this is a world of difference. I think by the time you've spent enough time on it, just accessing all the places where you can access it in India, I think it gets you to a point where self importance certainly is manageable, and then I think it's a great place to be. So yeah, that's the other journey that I've been slowly working on. Long way to go, but great place to be. When you're in India to have that realization, and just it's like being in a um, very high end supermarket where there's just so much available to access to take that journey.
Yeah.
So moving back from
Love
the
it,
US,
Rahul.
actually,
And
that's been the best part for me. Nothing can compare to the access to spiritual learning in India, and you can't find that anywhere else in the world.
hmm Yeah, no, in fact, I have one of my LPs, and he's a prolific angel investor. And also, he founded a company called Tilt, which Airbnb acquired. His name is James Bashar. And so he spends, 10 days every year in India, in a ashram close to Mumbai. I won't disclose the name, but yeah, it's a great place to be. And Rahul, we know you as a venture capitalist. What do your friends know you for? Who are you outside of work?
Yeah, so I've started actually displaying some of my hidden talents, for better or for worse. As a kid, I used to sing and I used to dance. So a lot of people who know me
Mm-hmm.
in my neighborhood would have seen me dancing. So and to a point where I have to tell myself to take a pause and ignore the music. But when I'm in the middle of good music, that's one thing that is hard to stop myself from doing, which is to break into a step. And then I've learned how to sing. So that's something I'm again going back to. So um, what should I say? Um, Rediscovering some of things that make
Working
me
on your
happy.
hidden talent.
Yeah, working on the hidden talent.
Yeah,
And again,
yeah.
I have a lot of suffering friends who have to go through all the trauma of listening, but that's certainly something I'm enjoying a lot myself. So
Mhm.
that's a cost you have to pay for being a friend. Which you have to listen to my singing.
Awesome, Rahul. This one was so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. I really appreciate it, and I had so much fun.
Same here, Shiva, and great to. I mean, as you said, I've had a very short night thanks to the delay, but great podcast and good to see you and good thing to wake up to. So thanks so much for being so patient.
Absolutely.